um, why did U.S. capital jump in a big way, despite the fact, that one of the um, um, escape routes that it was engaging in from the crisis of profitability was to transfer a lot of the labor-intensive economic processes to developing countries, like, for instance, to use the term developing country, or countries of the global south, like Mexico, Central America, Southeast Asia, Korea. Well, I think that China was really special, okay? And it was special because of the reservoir of cheap labor that it had, which was incomparable compared to that offered by countries that had already been integrated into global capitalism, like the Philippines and like Mexico, where there were already strong tendencies to equalize wage rates because of their long integration into the global capitalist system. On the other hand, China had, this vast pool of cheap labor that was, first of all, it was relatively not as susceptible to the equalization of wage rates in the global capitalist economy because of the relative closeness of the Chinese economy. And secondly, you had a strong, a large rural labor pool, a pool of rural labor that continually was releasing migrants to the cities, and thereby acting as a check on the rise of wages in the urban areas. So in this sense, then, China was very different, okay? And I think that very helpful in terms of understanding the role of China was Rosa Luxemburg's theory of imperialism. And let me just briefly read from her book, The Accumulation of Capital, because I think this is a very important source of understanding for us. So in her book, The Accumulation of Capital, Luxemburg wrote that a central dynamic of capitalism is to integrate pre-capitalist or non-capitalist areas of the world for three reasons. One, to acquire sources of raw materials for industry. Second, to serve as markets to absorb surplus production from the central capitalist economies. And third, to access cheap labor to counter rising cost of labor in the central economies. And of the three, the third is the most critical, since it is labor power that is the source of surplus value of profits. Let me quote, "The existence and development of capitalism requires an environment of non-capitalist forms of production," unquote. Luxemburg writes, and I quote, "Capitalism needs non-capitalist social strata as a market for its surplus value, as a source of supply for its means of production, and as a reservoir of labor power for its wage system," unquote. So capitalism is imperial by nature it cannot let other modes of production coexist with it because their destruction is necessary for its survival. And let me just have a long quote from her. Capital needs other races to exploit territories where the white man cannot work. It must be able to mobilize world labor without restriction in order to utilize productive forces of the globe, up to the limits imposed by a system of producing surplus value. This labor power, however, is in most cases rigidly bound by the traditional pre-capitalist organization of production. It must be, quote unquote, set free in order to be enrolled in the active army of capital. The emancipation of labor power from primitive social conditions and its absorption by the capitalist wage labor system is one of the indispensable historical basis of capitalism. Obtaining the necessary labor from non-capitalist societies, the so-called labor problem is ever more important for capital. All possible methods of quote-unquote gentle compulsion are applied to transfer labor from former social systems to the command of capital, unquote. So that is, from the accumulation of capital that authored by Rosa Luxemburg.